Hi, I'm Ann Feldman. Welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to paint a painting for you using only 5 colors plus white. I hope that you might find that this process will help to demystify the color mixing process. So let's get started. When I started out in painting, I used a very limited palette of 5 colors plus white. Now that I've been painting for a few decades, I find myself reaching for these same basic colors every time I set up my palette. I found that I can mix about 90% of the colors I need from this set of colors. So here are my colors. First I start off with ultramarine blue, which is a really nice deep dark value color. Cerulean blue is my warm blue. It leans more toward the green. Permanent rose is my cool red. I could also use alizarin crimson or quinacridone red or quinacridone rose. Cadmium red light is a beautiful, powerful, bright, warm red. Permanent yellow light or cadmium yellow light is my neutral yellow. I only need one version of yellow. And titanium white. Here's a look at my palette on any given day. As you can see, I have my 2 blues, my 2 reds, my neutral yellow, and titanium white. I'll be using this palette to paint this still life in its entirety. So let's get started. I'm going to start my painting by putting in a drawing using a combination of ultramarine blue and cadmium red light. This combination is a nice neutral that is a lot like a burnt sienna color. So I'm going to go ahead and start to lay in my drawing underneath my painting, measuring out a bit, keeping things as symmetrical as possible. You'll notice that when I'm drawing in overlapping shapes, I go ahead and put in the entire shape of the object behind the other object. That way I can make sure that my drawing is correct and that my measurements are symmetrical. Okay, I think that's a pretty good representation of what I want to be painting today. Now I'm going to start thinking about that background color. It's a light value, and I can use any number of different colors back there. I don't want it to be too boring. So what I will do is make a combination of white, cerulean blue, permanent rose, and my yellow, my cad yellow light, and do different mixtures of it so that every time I put down my paintbrush, I'll pick up a slightly different mixture each time so that my background isn't just flat and kind of boring. I'm going to dance the color around. You can see I'm putting in some yellow here. Then I might lean it more toward pink with some more permanent rose in my mix. Each time I'm putting in a lot of white so that I can really make that a nice light value in the background. You can see that there are some nice shadow shapes being projected on the right-hand side of these objects, on the background and on the tabletop. So I'll go in with slightly more color, slightly less white, to put in a slightly deeper value on the background here. Now I'm going to start looking at this foreground, And I can see that it's mostly a warm blue, which is my cerulean blue, but it's not as dark as cerulean blue straight out of the tube. So I'm going to add a little white to my cerulean blue. And I'm also going to put in touches of permanent rose and touches of the cadmium yellow so that I can gray down that cerulean blue a little bit so it's not so vivid that it's just jumping straight out at us. I want it to have a little bit of atmosphere in it, so I'm going to gray it down with a few of those other colors on my palette. But just slightly. The overwhelming color here is going to be the cerulean blue mixed with a little white. Now I'm going to start looking at the shadow on the foreground. I'm going to use a combination of ultramarine blue, permanent rose, and then my other red, cadmium red light. The reason being is that I want to gray this down a bit. So I'm going to use a red that has a little bit of yellow in it so that I don't get too powerful a purple going here. If it were just ultramarine blue and permanent rose, I'd get a super vibrant purple, and I want this to be grayed down. The reason I went in with ultramarine blue is so that I can get a nice dark value going down here too. Cerulean blue is pretty much a middle value color. Ultramarine blue is a nice dark value color, so I use that in my very dark mixes. And here I'm going to use ultramarine blue and cadmium red light together to mix pretty much a black. It's a very dark, super dark, rich brown, which is pretty much what this bottle is. I'm going to go ahead and cover the entire bottle with this very dark mixture, and I think I'll cover the other bottle with it too, just to get a nice dark value established, and then I'll come in and do the reflections a little bit later. But as you can see, these two bottles are really dark valued colors. Putting in the dark value on this blue bottle, I'll lean my color a bit more toward the ultramarine blue because it is a very, very dark blue. The other bottle's local color, if you will, is more of a brown. So I'm just playing with leaning the color a little bit. I've got to deepen my dark here. Get it nice and dark and rich so that I have something to work with when I put my reflections in later on. See, I've lost the edge between these two bottles. That happens anytime you have two dark values, or really anytime you have two similar values coming together, you can actually lose the edge there. Now I'm putting in the shadow side of this orange. And the way I see it, it looks like sort of a warm shadow color. So I'll use a lot of cadmium red in my mix and then purple it down with a little bit of blue and a little white so it doesn't get too dark. I'll go ahead and establish this nice shadow color all around it because I can always paint over it with a brighter color. I just want it to fold back, to lean back. Now I can see there's a nice transitional edge here between the shadow and the light side. So I'm going to put in a nice powerful cadmium red right out of the tube. We get to the fun part. I'm going to mix up some cadmium yellow light and some cad red light to make a nice powerful orange color here. No white in my mix. If I use some white in here, it'll start to look very chalky. So to lighten things that need to be very vibrant, I use yellow. I'm going to reestablish this transitional edge again with a little more cadmium red, and then just pull it together a little bit to smooth it out. I think I'll go ahead and darken the shadows under a few of these objects so that they sort of sit down on the table a little better. And now it's time to start thinking about another fun part, which is the reflections inside of these bottles to make them look as if they're actually empty. So we need to put in some of this reflection. I'm going in now with straight cadmium red, believe it or not. There's a lot of wet, dark paint underneath all of this. So I can go in with some pretty vibrant paint and just sort of let it intermingle with what's underneath. I will go in and reestablish dark around it so that it doesn't get too kind of mushy. But I can go in with some pretty vibrant paint right now to get that reflection to happen. Now I'm going to go in and kind of do some detail work on this cap. What I'm using here is a light gray. And grays are very easy to mix up if you use your three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And here I'm using some white to get it into the right value. By mixing any red, any blue, and a yellow together, you'll get a gray. It may lean toward yellow or red or blue. You just have to keep tweaking your mixture until you get it to the right sort of hue that you want to have it. But I'm just going to keep fiddling with this, putting in darks and light grays until I get something that kind of resembles that bottle. I don't want to get too detailed here, just want to give an idea of what's happening here on the top. Put in my highlights pretty early in the process so that I can kind of see where I'm going with all of this. I don't want to put in too much detail, and sometimes the highlights give enough information so that I don't have to fuss a lot with what's happening inside the bottle. I'm reestablishing my dark edges on this bottle here just to give it a little more form. And now I get to go in with some cerulean blue straight out of the tube. Once again, just sort of dancing this color on top of the wet color underneath it. And that way I can make this subtle sort of empty bottle look. And there we have it, a painting that's been created using 5 colors and white. I hope that you'll use this technique yourself now and try some paintings with the limited palette. It might unlock some of the mystery of color mixing for you.